Okay, so y'all remember how Maria Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize and we were all like, oh, thank God. Like, yay, Trump didn't win it. But then 30 seconds later, she turned around and came out the other side of her face and was like, oh, but I want to dedicate this to you, Trump. You're amazing. Okay, so that made me be like, hold up, tap the brakes. Everybody out of the car. And y'all, no. If you want to hear my working theory about why Trump is starting a war with Venezuela and how Maria Machado is at the center of it, keep watching. I'm sure it will come as no great surprise to y'all that every time the United States says that we're spreading democracy around the globe, whoever we're spreading it to is sitting on a giant pile of oil. Venezuela is the next target. And FYI, this isn't just about cheap gas prices. But let's talk about what's at stake here. Venezuela is sitting on the single largest oil reserve in the world, like 304 billion barrels, as opposed the United States has 70 billion barrels and Saudi Arabia has about 260 billion. So yes, that means that Venezuela is sitting on the largest reserve of oil in the world, which means that whoever has control over Venezuela's oil has control over the global oil reserves. And for decades, those refineries in Louisiana and Texas principally were refining oil all day long, right? Just keeping a steady stream of cheap gas coming to the United States. Millions of barrels from Venezuela. But in the early 2000s, Venezuela's president, Hugo Chavez, changed everything. So before Chavez, U.S. oil companies like Exxon, Mobil, ConocoPhillips, they basically ran the show. Venezuela's oil company, which is known as PDVSA, is technically state-owned. The foreign companies were the ones making all the money. This is before Chavez. And a lot of those oil projects were basically paying like 1% royalties. So for example, that would be like, let's say I have to make a huge batch of cookies, but my oven is tiny, so I don't have enough side, right? So I rent your oven and I bake all my cookies there. I sell that batch of cookies for $100. I keep 99. This is what the US oil companies were doing. And I give you $1 in royalty. That's what the US was doing to the Venezuelan oil company. And this is what happened in Venezuela for decades before Chavez. And in 2007, Chavez came in and said, no, we are not doing this anymore, okay? And he told all those foreign companies, you're going to give us 60% of the royalties. You're going to give Venezuela back a 60% ownership stake in all of these oil projects. And that's called nationalization, right? When a government takes control of an industry so that they can keep the profits inside of the country. Oh, when I tell you these oil companies had a damn fit, because of course they were going to lose billions. Exxon sued for like $12 billion. It's a big old mess. And Washington, D.C. never forgot about that. Oh, don't worry, I didn't forget about Maria. And after that, U.S. sanctioned the shit out of Venezuela and basically diplomatically isolated them. And of course, that completely crushed Venezuela's economy. Their production basically went from like 3 million barrels a day down to like 700,000 a day. Now, the official story is that it's blamed on corruption and mismanagement, but sanctions made it nearly impossible to sell the oil internationally or even to get parts in to fix their oil rigs. Now fast forward to 2025 and you have Maduro, Chavez's successor, still in power. And all of a sudden you have this new face of freedom, Maria Machado, has become the face of freedom in Venezuela. Here's the twist. Maria isn't some grassroots reformer. She was part of the 2002 coup attempt that tried to overthrow Chavez, okay? And she has a group called Sumate, and she has received money for years from an American group called NAD, the National Endowment for Democracy, which even former CIA officers call a front for regime change projects. Translation, whenever we want to install somebody who's friendly to US government, we basically orchestrate a regime change in their country. Now, because of Maria's role in that 2002 coup attempt, she's been banned from running in Venezuela. So if she ever takes power, which is what she's angling for, it won't be through a normal election. It'll be through US-backed intervention. Which brings us to the week that Maria Machado won the Nobel Prize. And that same week, Trump greenlit covert CIA operations in Venezuela. Troop deployments in the Caribbean, and all under the guise of fighting drug traffickers. You know, you guys have seen us. We've been blowing boats out of the water because, you got to create the story. As usual, the United States is selling it as restoring democracy, which is hysterical because we don't even have democracy here at this point. But what's really going on in the background, I'm going to get to a leaked tape here in a moment, is that Maria Machado has promised to privatize PDVSA again. And that means selling off pieces of Venezuela's national company, remember the one we were talking about at the top of the video, back to all the US corporations, Exxon, Chevron, etc. And she's reportedly planning to drop like 10 to 20% royalties, which means opening the floodgates for massive profits for these US oil corporations. So if we go back to our cookie analogy from earlier, Instead of basically giving Venezuela $1, now they would be giving Venezuela $20, but basically keeping $80. So basically going back to what was happening pre-Chavez. And you gotta remember, this isn't just about cheap gas. Because when the US ousts Maduro, installs Machado, it's gonna make gas prices really, really cheap, like $40 to $50 a barrel cheap, which hurts Russia, Iran, and China, all of whom depend on high oil prices to fund their economies. And if you've been paying attention, Trump's been throwing a fit about how the BRICS nations are basically trying to de-dollarize. They're trying to trade in their own currencies, while Venezuela has been butting up to these BRICS nations. So since the 1970s, almost all oil money has been traded in US dollars, which is why the dollar became known as the petrodollar. It's also why the US basically became the global reserve currency, which of course forces every single country that needs oil to first buy dollars, which keeps the US currency strong and gives the US enormous control over global finance. So when the US saw that Venezuela was starting to sell oil to China, Russia, Iran in various currencies other than the dollar, of course, this cannot happen. Because if oil stops being sold in dollars, the entire foundation of America's global power goes away. So let's connect the dots. Venezuela, biggest oil reserves on earth. And don't think this is speculation, because Machado got caught on a hot mic, Maria Machado, saying to Don Jr., Trump's son, forget about Saudi Arabia. We have more oil than them, and we are going to open the markets to America. So you have Machado, a pro-U.S. politician, ready to privatize PDVSA and reopen the oil taps. And of course, Trump's military anti-drug buildup as the cover story for regime change. And the Nobel Peace Prize is just a nice little bow on top that makes Maria Machado look like a freedom fighter for democracy instead of someone orchestrating an oil grab for America.